Welcome to the show today, everyone. I'm looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Nataly Kogan. If you don't know Nataly, you are really going to want to know her better after hearing this. Nataly is the founder of a company called Happier. She is also an author of The Happier Method and Happier at Work. If there is anybody who understands what it means and what it takes to be happy, it is Nataly. She is somewhat of an expert on the topic. And in this conversation with me, she talks about very tangible tips and things that people can think about in order to be happier, things that you can do to allow yourself to get happier, if that is your desire. She talks a lot about the concept of gratitude, how to be more grateful. There's a lot of how-to content in here. So I think you'll find this conversation really valuable. You'll walk away with some great information. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. So we're going to jump right in. Well, Nataly, welcome to the show. I am so excited. This is long awaited. I've wanted to have you on for a while, and now you are here. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm so grateful we get to chat.
Yeah, me too, because it's been a while. But you were such a big part of when I started my business. You were also, newly an entrepreneur. We sort of found each other. And I was so appreciative for how generous you were with your insights and, just the starting up and what that whole process is like. I think you were a little bit ahead of me in terms of the business was already established. I was just starting. So I want to first just say that you were such an enormously helpful and generous spirit in terms of what I started when I started She Speaks. And I really am so thankful.
I love hearing that. That means so much to me. I love hearing that. And, I don't think it matters how many years you're an entrepreneur. It's a journey. It's a daily up and down journey. So I love hearing that. And I love how much you've built, because you were just starting, and what you've built She Speaks into. And I've also, that's the one thing I actually do love about social media is you get to kind of be aware of what people are doing without, we all get busy. We have kids. And so I've loved watching your journey and all the things that you've built. So I love that we get to reconnect. And amidst this whole thing we're going through, you and I were chatting before, and I said one of the blessings has been just reconnecting with my high school best friend who I haven't talked to in 25 years, people like you, other people on the journey. So I think I'm grateful to hear that, and that we get to reconnect today.
Yeah, and I am so excited to talk to you about your company, which you've been at for a bit now. And let's just start with the thing that I really want to understand. So you are very well acquainted and very knowledgeable about what it means to be happy. You've done a lot, and when I say that, you've done so much research into it. You really have taken it on as a science. So let me start with asking you, as a student and an expert on happiness, what does happiness mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and before I answer that, and I promise I will, I just want to say that what makes me an expert in happiness, I have done tons of research, years of research into positive psychology, into neuroscience, into behavioral science, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a science geek. As my colleague would say, Nataly reads research papers for fun. I do. I just have to say that. So as much as I've done all this research, that's not what makes me expert in happiness. What makes me expert in happiness is that I failed at it for 40 years of my life. That is what makes me expert. I came to the US as a refugee when I was a teenager from Russia. I was 13 and a half. And it was such as you can imagine, a traumatizing, very difficult experience that I felt so awful that all I wanted to do was to feel good, to feel happy. And I equated that with my American dream. And then for 20, let's just not say exactly how many years, For many decades, I believe that the way you achieve happiness is you achieve a lot of things. You take care of your family, you kind of make your life amazing, and then you feel good. So that's what happiness used to mean to me. And I did that. I tried really, really hard, and I achieved an incredible amount of things I'm very proud of, that I know we'll get to talk about. I built a very successful career in like male-dominated fields of venture capital and finance, and I did take care of my family, and I did achieve meaningful things. None of that made me happy. What it made me was exhausted, overwhelmed, and eventually I burnt out, and it was very, very scary. And I hit a wall and had to restart my life. And it's a long-winded answer, but I think it's always really important to start with what happiness isn't. And so what I have learned in my expert journey as both someone who went about it the wrong way for 40 years and also doing the research is that two things I want to say is that, first of all, happiness is a skill. So it's not something you feel, it's something you do. It's a practice, it's a skill. And that, I do have to say, has been the most liberating mindset shift that I have made probably in my life. Because when you look at it as a skill, you have freedom from whatever story might be trapping you away from it. So like if you want to learn how to play the piano, right? I use this example a lot. My daughter, Mia, who is 16, who's my BFFFFFF. And I cross all my fingers and all the gratitude that my 16-year-old daughter is my best friend. But she's been playing piano for 13 years, 12 years, a long time. And she practices every day, right? We're this like crazy Russian family. Of course, the child plays piano, all that stuff. But when Mia doesn't practice, her piano playing gets worse. When she practices, it gets better. It's a skill. So looking at happiness as a skill versus something you achieve your way into or something lucky people have and others don't, I think is incredibly liberating. And that's what I've dedicated my life to in my career, is to teaching these skills. And the other thing that I think is really important about what happiness means to me, I used to think that happiness means you feel positive all the time. You know, you feel good all the time and everything's amazing. And that's what I try to feel. But the thing is, we're human beings. We cannot feel good all the time. We can't. We cannot feel positive all the time. And so happiness isn't about feeling positive all the time, but it's actually about learning how to embrace all of the different emotions that we feel as human beings, and to do that with compassion and with resilience. And those are the two things, the two huge mindset shifts that I've made about happiness. And that's how I think about it. That's how I teach it. And, at this point I have the gift of having taught this to, hundreds of thousands of people. And I've seen the progression and the progress and the benefits in them. So I'm fairly confident in it now. But again, I learned about this not because I studied it. I learned about it because I did it the wrong way.
So to that end, then, what is, because you have taught this to so many people, because this is, immerse yourself in this study of happiness, what is the single most important thing that you see people have in common who are quote unquote happy?
Yeah. It's a good question. So first of all, happiness is pretty subjective. We all know what it means for us, but it may mean different things for different people. I think I like to think of well-being. I think well-being is a more universal metric, if you would. There are some things that we can do to measure well-being, but I would say it's hard to pick one thing they have in common, but I guess I would say the common thing they have is that they're not so attached to a perfect single definition of happiness. It's that they recognize that there isn't some formula, there isn't some prescription. And unless they're feeling that way, they're unhappy. Is they recognize, I guess, even if they don't use this word, it's a skill they practice, and we all practice it in different ways. I think the other thing that I've seen people with greater well-being have in common is they recognize, and this is connected, that we have to do our inner work, that happiness is really about doing the inner work. It's about doing the inner work to shift out of some of the natural patterns of thinking that our brain creates. It's inner work to create a more supportive relationship with ourselves and others. And so I think that is the other aspect of happiness as a skill. It's an internal skill. I think it's tempting, and I definitely did this, right? I talked about this, that I thought happiness, like you achieve certain things, you get to certain places, and then you get it. Well, it's actually in there, and the work is inside. And that probably is the quality that's the most common that I see.
So it's the recognition that happiness is a skill that you have to work on a day-to-day
The work
basis.
is internal. Yep. And the work is internal.
And that it's not something that you get, it's something that you maybe uncover within you.
Within yourself. I'm working on my next book. My first book is called Happier Now, where I talk about this. But my next book I'm working on right now, I actually have like 5 days to finish my first draft. So, no pressure. I'm in good shape though. I put this quote in it. And so my next book is really focused on how to help people struggle less. So if you think about my first book, Happier Now, was really about how to feel better if you're feeling okay. My next book, I really wanted people to help people who are struggling, which is all of us at certain times in our lives. And I have this quote in there from Michelangelo, which I love, is when he talked about that the sculpture is already in the marble. Like when he sees a piece of marble, the sculpture is in there. His job isn't to create it, it's to chisel it out. And that's the way that I think about our well-being, our emotional fitness, our happiness, our emotional health, is we all have the capacity for it, but we have to do the inner work to practice it and chisel it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love that way of thinking so what are some tips? So let's say somebody wants to feel happier.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's a skill. And it's, I guess also like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you feel comfortable and the stronger it gets. So what are some tips that you could offer to somebody who's listening who just wants to start doing something to feel happier?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I teach these, again, this came out of my own experience and the research. So there's these 5 happier skills that I've identified, and we're not going to go through them all because that'll take too long. But one of the skills that I'd offer as a place to start is gratitude. And gratitude is one of those things, I've probably now done, hundreds of keynotes about gratitude to companies, to conferences. And gratitude is one of those things I find, like when I get on stage and I start talking about it, people start like nodding. And it's like, I think we all know what gratitude is. It's not rocket science. I don't have to define it for you, right? I will so we're talking about the same thing. Gratitude is a skill of zooming in on the small positive moments in your everyday experience and sharing your gratitude with others. But we all kind of know what it is, and people start nodding. And then I say to everyone, how many of you are familiar with gratitude? 99% of people raise their hand and familiar with its benefits. Wonderful. And then I say, how many of you practice gratitude daily? And like just a couple of hands go up. And that's the thing about gratitude and all the other happier skills. And I often say that gratitude is like broccoli. We all know broccoli is good for us, right? It's got a lot of vitamins and the nutrients, but you cannot get the health benefits of broccoli just by knowing it's good for you. You can't even get them if you buy the broccoli. You have to eat the broccoli. So with gratitude, I think it's also like we default to like, oh yeah, I know it's good for me. Like you have to practice it daily. And so I would begin with gratitude. It's where I began on my journey to chiseling out my inner well-being. And I'll give you a really, really specific practice because that's kind of my passion, you could say my obsession, is I teach happiness as a skill, and I teach these skills, and it's all about practices. So I've said this, that I could give a 10-minute keynote or a 2-hour workshop. You'll always get a practice. So here is your practice. I call it morning gratitude lens. So in the morning, before you pick up your phone, before you check social media, before you read the news, take a moment and think of 3 specific things you are grateful for. It is really important to be specific. The biggest mistake that I see people make with gratitude, I used to do it too, is like I'll say to my audience is like, tell me something you're grateful for. And people will say, I'm grateful for my family, or I'm grateful for my health. And those are wonderful things, but your brain doesn't care. They're too general. They're too familiar to the brain. So your brain's like, blah, 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 whatever. So you want to be really specific, like, why are you grateful for your family? Like,
Mhm.
why are you grateful for your health? The smaller, the better.
Mhm.
And jot those 3 things down if you can. You don't have to keep a journal, by the way. You don't have to like journaling. Jot them down on a Post-it note. Put them in a
Mhm.
notes app.
Mhm.
Text them to a friend or a
Mhm.
colleague. I teach this practice at work a lot, where you text your gratitudes or Slack them to a colleague, because then you're encouraging them to do it too.
Mhm.
But commit to this practice, 3 gratitudes before your first email every morning. And I
Mhm.
call it morning gratitude lens because your brain loves when you give it directions. Our brain has very strong inertia. So if you start your day with gratitude, your brain begins to look at the rest of your day through the lens of gratitude. It actually looks for more things it appreciates. And that has so many benefits, because your brain naturally looks for what's wrong. Your brain has a negativity bias, so you're countering that. So that is where I would begin. And, I've said this often, this is your Nataly guarantee. Like, those better housekeeping, like this good housekeeping. This is your Nataly guarantee. If you do this practice for 5 days in a row, you will notice an improvement in your well-being. Will everything in your life be amazing? No. Will you never feel stress? No. But you will begin to alter the direction of your brain's lenses of thoughts, and that begins to make a difference. That's where I would start. That's where I started, with gratitude.
So you said don't make it general. You said make it
Yes.
specific. So can you give an example? So you don't want
Yeah.
to say, I'm grateful for my family. You want to say,
I want to say, tell me why, Eliza. Tell me why you're grateful for my family. So I will tell you something I'm grateful for is, I mentioned my daughter is 16. She is in virtual high school, and the schedule is all kind of funky. So they don't have classes in the afternoon on Tuesday. So she went to our little center of our town to meet a friend. And I'm really grateful that she's 16 years old, but she still texts me when she leaves. She texts me when she gets there. And I love that we still do that. So notice how you can see it in my face. I'm looking at Eliza, but I know you can see it in my face. As I get specific, I smile. Because when you get specific about your gratitude, you give yourself an opportunity to actually notice that moment. The reason I say don't be general is anything that is familiar to your brain, it puts on the back burner, on the autopilot. I say this often. Your brain could care less if you're happy. Your brain does not care about your feelings. Your brain's only focus, and its number one job, is to keep you safe from danger. Okay. And so anything that's familiar, it puts on autopilot because it's trying to preserve energy to notice danger, right? Because the brain is just focused on, how do I protect her from danger? So when you say I'm grateful for my family, your brain knows you have a family. It's like blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter. But when you get specific, you literally are pausing your brain. You're saying, whoa, wait, hold on a second. I mean this. Let's pay attention to this. And your brain, as I said, it'll take direction. I'll be like, oh yeah, that is really nice that Mia still texts you. Huh, that's awesome. And you get the gift of that. You feel your brain releases serotonin and dopamine. Those are 2 neurotransmitters that make you feel good. That's your science geek moment of gratitude. But you don't even need to know that. You feel the benefit, right? Like in my talks, I'll often have people take a moment and write a short note of gratitude to someone on their phone. And I take a picture of the audience just because they're all smiling.
Yeah.
And I said, do you know that you're all smiling? That's the benefit of gratitude. There's actually certain parts of our brain that are dedicated to gratitude. We actually have circuits for gratitude. And again, it's a skill that when you practice it daily, if you practice it daily for 3 weeks, your brain naturally starts to notice more things that are positive and more things it appreciates. So again, that's where I began my journey. And so to me, it's the best place to start. And especially right now that we're going through something so challenging, gratitude isn't just a way to help yourself feel better. It's also the most important source of resilience. There's a lot of research that shows that people who are most resilient during challenges, including really traumatic events, like losing their home in a hurricane, or vets coming back from the war, people who practice gratitude are more resilient. It's not that they don't experience the difficult emotions. It's that they buffer the extent of them because they remind their brain, yes, these are challenges, but yes, there's also things that are okay. So right now, I think gratitude isn't optional. I think it's a prescription that we all need to be taking.
Okay, I love this, and I have so many questions. I have 2 in particular that I need to ask you as follow-up. First, you mentioned that, you want your brain to get specific, and that helps you really kind of unlock that part of your brain that is going to focus in on it. So does that mean that you should be thinking every day something different? Like those 3 things that you wake up and think every day, should those be 3 different things?
They don't have to be, but think about it. So I actually had, I lead these 2, you got to get into one of them, Eliza. I lead these 2 virtual leadership programs every year. One of them is for elevating women leaders. You got to get in there because it's for women leaders and entrepreneurs. And it's amazing. We take a year-long approach. We learn all these skills, how they apply to yourself, your team, your leadership. It's fantastic. And the reason I just thought of it is one of the women who we have a cohort running now. She said to me, Nataly, I've just experienced so many benefits ever since I got really intentional about gratitude through your work. She said, but I wonder if I'm doing it wrong, because every morning my husband makes me coffee and I'm really, really grateful. Like, that is one of the things I write. She's keeping a gratitude journal. Fantastic. But again, can you be specific about it? So I asked her, well, some days it's just, I'm grateful my husband's making me coffee. I said, talk to me about the experience. And it turns out that her gratitude is a little different every day. So some days she's really grateful that it's an expression of love. Some days she's really grateful because the coffee is good. Some days she's grateful. Apparently the guy made a biscotti. I'm like, who is this husband? I mean, my husband, I have to give a shout out to my husband. It wouldn't be fair. Avi, we've been together since college. We've been 19 lifetimes together, but he, those Bialetti, like the coffee makers, the stovetop coffee. So he fills mine up. He puts the water in the coffee, and I have coffee later in the day. So he puts it on the stove. So he leaves me a little note. So I got to give him the shout out. But the point is, it is important that there's enough variation in your gratitude, because again, if it's always the same, it's not that it's wrong. It's that your brain is going to become so familiar with it that it's not going to notice.
Yeah.
The thing to recognize about your brain, if anything is familiar, it's almost like it didn't happen. You know how you could I have this experience with my tea. So I made tea before, and now there's almost no tea, but I don't actually remember drinking it. We've all had that experience, right? Or you get in the car, when we used to commute to work, for those of us who are lucky to work from home, but you get in the car to drive home from work and you get there, but you don't remember the way. That's what's happening. It's so familiar to your brain. It's saving energy by not registering it. So it is important that your gratitude, I'd say that it's special every day. So maybe it's the same thing, but you find something different about it that you appreciate.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Well, so now here's the next question.
Yeah.
Related to that. So how important is it that the thing that you're grateful for is a positive? I am grateful for the fact that my husband's making me coffee because of whatever, versus a negative, I'm grateful that I'm not homeless. I'm grateful. I feel like I hear a lot of women in particular, when they're talking about being grateful, they're like, well, my circumstance isn't as bad as this other person's circumstance.
Yeah. It's a great question, Lisa. Yeah, it's a great question.
For me personally, that doesn't feel as good. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, it's actually a thing. So I'm actually going to use our kids as an analogy, because I imagine lots of folks listening have kids. So how you have a kid and they start complaining about something trivial, especially anyone with tweens or teenagers, right? I remember years ago, I just remember this so clearly. My daughter was complaining that she didn't have this particular kind of sneaker. I don't know what it was, but it was the cool thing, and she didn't have them. And you know how we have this instinct as parents to be like, stop complaining. Other kids have it worse. There are kids in poor countries or we do the thing of when I was your age, I walked barefoot backwards in the snow to the right. We do that. So the thing is, our brain doesn't care about that because it's too far removed. It's not actually our experience. So for all the parents watching, that is not effective. Don't do that. It doesn't make any difference. The kid's brain goes, whatever. Kids in poor countries. My mom, when she was young, that was 5,000 years ago. That's prehistoric times. So it just doesn't go in. It's not wrong. That's why you don't feel the effect. So when you say, I am grateful because I have a job and other people, I'm grateful to have a job because other people don't, The other people thing, your brain
Mm-hmm.
actually doesn't care about. It's
Yeah.
just like not your experience. So it is really important that your gratitude, I'd say it's not just for something positive, but it is something that is directly yours, directly in your experience, or
Mm-hmm.
it's gratitude for another person, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the most powerful ways to practice gratitude, and I love that we're talking about this today because I had this experience this morning, is one of the most powerful ways to practice gratitude is to express your gratitude to someone else. And
Mm-hmm.
again, the same rules apply. Thank you is not gratitude. I've said this on stage, and I tell people, like, please don't be like, oh, that woman Nataly told me to not say thank you. Please say thank you. It's very polite. It's nice, but it's not gratitude because it's not specific. So when you're expressing gratitude to someone else, the same thing applies. Why? Why? You don't have to say a lot, but just like you began this interview by telling me something you were grateful for about how I was a resource for you, your face was very warm and connected. I think you felt benefit. I felt really wonderful and connected, but it was because you were specific, right? And so when we're specific with our gratitude for someone else, we feel the benefit because we remind our brain, yo, my husband makes me coffee every morning. That is a nice thing, right? And it counters some of the, oh my God, why is the remote always on top of the table, right? Like it's a thing. But the other person also feels that when you tell them why you are grateful for them. And there's all this research in the workplace of how it motivates and increases resilience. But again, what's really important is your authenticity about your gratitude. And that's, I guess, the other thing. Like when you're grateful to have a job or a home and you're like, because other people don't, it's not authentic because actually your brain doesn't care about other people. Like you think it does, but it actually doesn't. And the specificity and the one caveat I will offer, because this is a really beautiful practice, is sometimes if you're practicing gratitude a lot, people tell me this, like some days they can't think of what they're grateful for. Don't feel bad. Like, especially if it's not something you're used to doing, your brain is just like, yep, no, not grateful. What can be helpful to actually practice, I think in my first book, think of something in your life that you take for granted, like a comfort, like water coming out of the faucet, food in your fridge, internet, garage, car, whatever. And imagine your life without it.
Yeah.
I actually call this practice, imagine life without this. Literally imagine it. You will feel grateful for it. But again, it's in your life.
Right.
So when we do the comparison thing, it doesn't work because our brain actually doesn't care.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that because it's always felt different to me personally. And now I have a better understanding of why.
Yeah.
So, Nataly, can anybody be happy?
Absolutely. Again, as long as you don't define happiness as feeling positive all the time, because that is not possible. Yes. So there is such a thing as a happiness baseline. So we do get it from our genetics, our families, but that is about 50%. That's it. The other 50% is entirely up to you, which is why when you think of it as a skill, well, wherever you are, you just practice. And the thing I always tell people is, you know, my happiness baseline naturally is like down here. You can't see it. I have to go off screen. Like I'm a tortured Russian Jewish refugee. Okay. Like happiness is not a word I knew growing up. Like what Russians are famous for and Jews and the women in my family is suffering. Like I was a very agnostic Jew, but suffering was definitely my religion because it was the religion of like my family. Like I'm writing about this in my new book that I thought anything meaningful in life is struggle and suffering. So my natural happiness baseline is like, I don't know, below, really low. And yet I practice and I practice all these skills. And by the way, just because I teach them, it doesn't mean I don't have to practice. I practice all the time and I improve my well-being and I feel happier. So yes, it is incredibly accessible, but that's why I started with think of it as a skill. I really truly see that as a liberating choice to make because unless we see it as a skill, then our stories will trap us. Then my story of, no, I'm meant to suffer. Women in my family always suffer. Then I'm trapped. And I was trapped in that story for 40 of my 45 years.
Yeah. So, well, and that is, I think that's the thing that people start to believe that they can't be happy, right? Yeah. Because it's a learned experience that if you think, all over and over again, my life has been and I'm not happy.
Yes.
You start to believe that you can't be happy.
Of course, because We don't see ourselves or the world as it is. We see it as we believe it is, right? So, you know how I said your brain doesn't care about your feelings? Your brain does not care about your feelings, and it has certain tendencies it's developed, like the negativity bias that I mentioned, because it's only caring about one thing. It needs to keep you safe from danger. So one of those other tendencies is default thinking patterns, right? The brain loves inertia, the familiar. So if you've been telling yourself the story that you can't be happy or somebody else has, your brain's like, yep, I can't be happy. And then we've all heard about confirmation bias. Now that it has the story, the mental frame, it's constantly looking for proof. Aha, you see? Yesterday, I was so sad. It's proof I can never be happy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. And this is like the core theme of the book I'm working on is we have to have the courage. And courage is a huge theme that I realized, and it's become a huge theme that I talk about. We need to have the courage to break free, to break through these stories. Yeah. And that's why you practicing it as a skill, I think, is so liberating, because actually you can keep your story for a while. Just begin to practice. Yeah. And over time, the story will crack because, and again, I feel like now, you know, I started to do this work and I started to teach happier skills and I started my company and doing all the things I do with companies and teams because I learned these skills and they worked for me. And again, I am not someone who ever thought I could feel good. But now I have like so much more evidence. I mean, again, I've worked with hundreds of thousands of people, like leaders one-on-one and companies and teams. I've just never met a single human being who said to me, Nataly, I did all the things and it doesn't work. Because it does, because it's just, it does come down to brain science. You know, one of my favorite quotes about the brain, and actually I'm not sure where it comes from. I think it might come from Ram Dass, who's a great spiritual teacher, actually died last year. But he said, your brain is a terrible master, but a great servant. I'm going to say it again because it's kind of a life-changing quote for me. Your brain is a terrible master, but a great servant. And what it means is, left to its own devices, your brain can really make you struggle. It really can, because again, it really doesn't care what you feel. It cares about protecting you from a pack of wolves because that's what it's evolved to do. Even if there are no packs of wolves, it makes up packs of wolves. And so it's developed all these tendencies and negativity bias. You see much more of what's wrong and what's negative, including about yourself, by the way, for all the self-critics out there. Hi, I'm in the club. It is afraid of uncertainty. Your brain hates uncertainty, which is the definition of life, because in uncertainty, it doesn't know how to do its job. So it makes up worst case scenarios and it makes up all these stories. Your brain loves default thinking patterns. So it doesn't like to change. It likes to convince you to stay in the same place. And so left to its own devices as a master, your brain can cause a lot of struggle, a lot of suffering. But when you direct it, when you do this inner work, when you create a more supportive relationship, when you don't take every thought it gives you and like, oh yeah, this is true, but you are become what I call an editor of your thoughts. And you say, is this true? Is this helpful? Right? When you practice that, and for any of the fans of or students of cognitive behavior therapy, you're definitely hearing echoes of it. I've been an amateur student of it for many years. But when you become the editor of your thoughts, when you create a partnership with your brain, when you actually take charge, your brain is amazing because it'll take direction. So it's a great servant, but we have to get into that place to have the courage to change. And I actually think that's one of the hardest things. Practicing these skills, Eliza, none of them are hard. None of the skills I teach are hard. None of the practices take a long time. And actually the most common thing I hear from people is like, you know, when you mentioned it, it seems so simple, like trivial, could never make a difference. And it's like changed my life. So that's not hard. The hard part is to have the courage to change.
Well, I love that. Well, I saw that you tweeted the other day, think of yourself as the editor of your thoughts. Yeah. Is the thought true? What facts support it? Does this help improve, grow, develop the narrative of my life?
Yeah.
Is it useful or just repeat of something from before? And literally life-changing. So I love that because, you know, I'm a big believer that we frequently go to interpreting things as negative. You know, when something happens and we think, why did that person do that to me? And one of the things that I I'm thankful that I learned relatively early, and I'm sure it was from an adult in my life, that it's rarely about you. If something, let's say something happens, right, and you think, why did that person do that?
Yeah.
It is, even if it has been done to you, if you really think about it, it is rarely about you. It's probably more about what's going on with them in their life right now. And as you said earlier, it's not that people don't care about each other, but they're way more focused on what's going on with them than what's going on with you.
Yes.
So that for me has helped a lot in how I think about the world. And it's very much one of the things I teach to my kids.
Yeah.
Because, they come home from school and they're like, can you believe so-and-so did this? Or, well, when they're going to school.
Yeah.
And what I say to them is, this is not about you. This is about them. And, that just, I think also as a woman, and I have 2 girls, but as women, we can take things very personally.
Oh,
and it can really affect our happiness. It can affect somebody, somebody.
The story begins to spin. Yeah, because the story begins to spin. Oh, yeah. I think, and I work, I'd say in our audience is probably 70% women, although I do 50% of my work is with teams and companies, and there it's half and half. I work with many teams who are mostly men. And what I have learned is actually women are not unique in that. It's everyone. Maybe we talk about it more, because I've just learned that we have so much more in common with each other. But I do hear it from women more. And yeah, this part about it's about us, I want to share this little thing that happened that I think will be so relevant. Just happened a couple weeks ago. So I love Instagram. Instagram is probably my favorite because I'm also an artist. I paint. So I follow a lot of artists there. So I posted something on Instagram, and someone made it, a woman who I know she's followed me for a while. She's got a sizable following. She put it in her story. And then 15 minutes later, I realized that was a typo in my graphic. So I took it down to fix it. She sends me and she told me I can tell the story because we had this great moment about it. So she sends me a DM and she's like, oh my God, I am so sorry. I wasn't supposed to share that. You took it down because you were upset that I shared it. I'm really sorry. I'm not going to share your post again. And I was like, so I replied to her. I was like, actually, I took it down because there was a typo. And she was like, oh my God, I assume I did something wrong. And then we had this moment. I was like, can I talk about this? I actually asked for permission. I was like, this is such a great example because it's the tiniest thing. And look how fast her brain went to, oh my God, it's something I did. Not, maybe Nataly decided she didn't want to share that, or there was something wrong with the post. Again, is this story true? Her brain told her the story that I took my post down because of something she did. Is this story true? And to answer that question, you have to have a fact to support it. I think is not a fact. I think that person thinks is not a fact, right? And so I share that because it's such a small thing. And she was like, oh my God, how quickly that happened. And, we're actually the thing that, one of the other skills I teach of the 5 is kindness, intentional kindness. And actually, this is connected to, and what you were saying about it's not about us, is actually part of practicing compassion. And, I teach this practice. I call it the lens of compassion. So someone annoys you or frustrates you or does something to upset you, like you were talking about your kids in school or us, right? Instead of snapping back or internally, that person, which you might feel good for 5 seconds, but I think we all know it does not feel good. So can you instead practice compassion? What that means is compassion has 2 parts. You recognize that everyone is struggling with something, and you try to do something to alleviate the struggle. So the lens of compassion, when the person does something rude or annoying to you, can you pause and can you think about, what might the person be struggling with that is causing them to act that way? And then what can I do to alleviate the struggle? Now, I realize, I guarantee, because my brain still does this, 90% of the people listening just went, oh my God, no, I don't want to let the person off the hook. This is not about them. This is about protecting your emotional energy. Think of how much energy we waste, our own precious limited energy. You do not have unlimited energy, even if you think you do. I learned this the hard way. Think of how much energy we waste because of other people's behaviors. So practicing the lens of compassion is not about them. I often, when I teach this, like in team workshops, I say, make up a story. You don't have to talk to this person. Make up a story. Oh my God, that person was rude to me because they spilled coffee in their presentation and their wife yelled at them and they had a flat tire and the cat threw up. Like when I do these workshops in person, I actually have people make up these stories. And as they do it, I say, how do you feel? They're like, actually, I feel kind of bad for that person. Instead of feeling angry or annoyed or frustrated, which is and a waste of energy, compassion actually increases patience. It contributes to well-being. It lowers your blood pressure, reduces stroke. And so I think part of it is also part of this. It's not just about us, is using this place of compassion of like, wow, that person wrote me a nasty email. What is something they're struggling with? And I had this experience just the other day. So I do a weekly video on YouTube. And I think it was last week, I did one. I'm doing this whole series on how to avoid burnout. And that somebody, I forget, there's a bunch of people like dislike the video, thumbs down. And this gentleman posted a comment. He's like, who goes around the internet voting down great content like this? And I replied to him and I said, I don't think it's about me or my content. I said, people are really struggling and this is hard to watch. And he was like, what a great reminder. And so I think this is also part of practicing your happier skill is to practice compassion. And that actually helps you not waste your energy on what other people did wrong.
I love that advice. I think it is so true. And, giving somebody else grace so that you can give yourself some grace and what benefits that gives to you. Because you're right. I mean, we only have so much share of mind, and what we allow fill our mind is really how we think and how we spend our time. So
no, it's, one of the things people, this is hard to summarize, but people ask me like, what have been, in addition to these skills that I practice, like what have been some of the big changes that I've made in my life to heal from burnout? And it was really scary. I mean, I put my life on hold for 3 years. I put my company on hold. I thought everything in my life that was meaningful to me, from my marriage to my company, was gone. It was really, really scary. And so people ask me like, what are some things you've changed in addition to these skills? Elisa, one of the things that I've become so intentional about and so aware of is my mental diet. And, we talk about diet like we think about the foods we eat. I have become so intentional about my thoughts and also what is it that I'm letting in, right? Literally to a point where like I'll see a news article and I ask myself, do I want to read this? Like, does my reading this, can I help someone? Does it help me or my family or my work in any way? And if the answer is no, it's just my brain wants to read some more negative stuff, I don't do it. And yes, it involves a lot of thinking, a lot of processing, but it's to the point that you just made. We don't have unlimited emotional, mental, and physical energy. We start every day with a limited reservoir. And, like when we talk about self-care, for example, we think of like doing things to fuel our energy, but I think it's as important to do fewer things that drain your energy. And thoughts you think are not free. They either fuel you or drain you. Information you take in is not free. It either fuels you or drains you. And so I think a huge part of cultivating your well-being or happiness or resilience is becoming more intentional about this thought. Is it draining or is it fueling? And if it's draining, why am I with it? Like, why am I allowing this thought?
So you talked about the fact that you got to a point where you were burnt out. How can you talk a little bit about how did you know that it was burnout? How did you know you needed to change something?
Yeah, well, reluctantly, and I dragged my feet for a long time. So I'll start from the end. I mean, the way that I knew I was burnt out is one day I just couldn't function anymore. And I mean this both physically, emotionally, mentally. I just stopped being able to function. Everything was, it was really scary. I don't actually quite exactly even remember, but I stopped sleeping. I wasn't really functional as a mom, as a CEO. Like I I don't know if I like spend some nights at the office or in my car. It's that surreal, Lisa. I'm actually not quite sure. But that's how I knew it was kind of the end. But don't let that fool you into thinking that when I was feeling that way, I was like, okay, I need to change. Because my brain's story wouldn't let me not be okay. Because I was a CEO of a company called Happier. I was a refugee. I was an entrepreneur. I was incredibly successful. Cannot be burning out. Cannot not be okay. So that's why I talk about courage so much. I didn't have courage. I didn't. And I didn't even have the awareness of that. Like, I mean, that's not true. I had some awareness that I have to change something, but I had no courage because I had no courage to admit. What actually kind of set me, like there was actually a specific incident. So it was one of my investors. His name is Mike Hirschland. He's with Resolute Ventures. I always have to give him a shout out. I don't know if he knew how powerful it was what he did. But one day, so I was running Happier. Happier was then a tech company. We had this very popular gratitude app. And we had like our one-on-one. We're sitting outside. It was warm, I remember. And I was like going on and on about some, company update to him. And he said, stop talking. He said, you are not okay and you need to get help. To which I said, F you, I'm fine. We were friendly, I was like, whatever. He said, no. Here is the deal. I'm done talking to you. I'm not going to talk to you anymore until you get help. And I want you to go see this woman. And he gave me this card. Her name was Janet. And I was like, I don't do therapy because I don't do therapy, all the reasons. And he said, I don't care. And also she's not a therapist. He said, when you've seen her 3 times, I will talk to you. And that's it. He walked away. And for a month, Elisa, after that, so my investor tells me that he's not going to talk to me. And like, you need to talk to your investors when you raise money. Still for a month after that, I was like, F this, I'm fine. I like couldn't do it. But then I literally stopped functioning and I needed to talk to him because the company was falling apart, by the way, because guess what? When you are burning out as a leader, you suck at everything you do. It doesn't just affect you. It affects your family. It affects your team. My team was burning out. People were leaving. I was making horrible decisions. It's all really, really painful to say, but I want to say it because I thought that I could like hide it. And that's the biggest lie that I was telling myself. So finally I was like, let me go see this woman. Janet became my spiritual teacher. Good news. She didn't say the word spiritual for 2 years because she was smart. Because at the time I was like, spiritual is like woo-woo crap for like people who can't make it in real life, so she was really smart. But Janet was, she became my, she wouldn't like this. I call her my guide. She doesn't like that. She said that all she did was to help me see my own guidance. But so when he gave me that ultimatum, that was part of what caused me to change. And then the other thing, a couple months later, I just couldn't, I literally couldn't function anymore. So I had to put my life on hold. And by that, I literally mean put my life on hold. I laid off the team. I went to my investors and I said, I'm not okay. And I don't want to shut the company because I could, there was like a 0.00001% of my brain knew that this was part of my life's mission, just would be in a different way. I said, but I need to stop. And everything in my life was in trouble. My company, my marriage, my everything. And for the next 2.5 years, I did the inner work. And so if I look back, there were so many burnout signs because the thing is, I was burning out daily. And this is something I'm writing about in my book about breaking the cycle of daily burnout. So many of us are burning out daily. We think of burnout as like this big snowball, but actually many people are burning out daily. And where you notice you're dreading everything, you don't have energy for anything, you're snapping at everyone, nothing brings you a sense of meaning. Those are some signs. I had all those signs. Did I pay attention? No, because I had no courage ever to face my own feelings. It just wasn't a skill that I learned. And so, I talk about my burnout a lot, and I talk about a lot to leaders and a lot to companies because part of it was also shame for a while. But I cannot tell you that so I write about it in my first book, Happier Now. So it was kind of like coming out when the book came out. I cannot tell you how many entrepreneurs, leaders, executives reached out to me and I call them whisper emails, and they were like, oh my God, I'm so grateful that you wrote about that. I feel like this. but I
Mhm.
don't feel like it's okay to say that. So,
Mhm.
I've said this word a lot. I think an enormous part, an enormous skill to practice
Mhm.
to truly experience well-being is courage to be more open with yourself and others about your
Yeah.
emotions.
Yes. I completely agree with you, and I think that that is one of the things that we hear from women, because, part of what we do, we work with a lot of influencers,
Yep.
and one of the things that we've seen the shift in 2020 was really people getting very real
Yep.
about what was going on. The sort of picture perfect life
Hmm.
is not necessarily so picture
Yep.
perfect. And
Yep.
social media kind of like really feeds that, that desire for everyone to have things be
Hmm.
okay. But at the same time, they're not. And I think one of the things that we saw shifting in 2020, over the course of 2020, was people starting to say, it's okay for me to say that I'm having a really hard day. And
Hmm.
maybe that's one of the gifts of this pandemic,
Yeah.
is that people, I see so many more people kind of coming out and saying, I am not doing okay
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's so, so true. And by the way, I bet those posts were the most popular posts, by the way, for the
Mm-hmm.
influencers,
Mm-hmm.
because the thing is actually, this is a post that I put on Instagram today, is no one wants your perfect. They just want your human.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have developed a much greater following, a much better connection with my audience since I've dropped my crap and I am as real as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Which also means I acknowledge the good and the difficult. Like we
Mm-hmm.
can't, this is the thing, like
Mm-hmm.
the gratitude helps us to not forget the good. But I think it is so true. And, it's, uh, one of the other skills I teach is acceptance, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
used to think of acceptance as like, oh, that's for the weak people. Acceptance is like to roll over and be like, whatever happens, happens. And again, I was just ignorant, because acceptance is a skill of looking at how things are and how you feel with clarity, which is about the facts, instead of judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I should not feel like this should not
Mm-hmm.
be like that. And then using that as your starting point to move forward. So when we accept our difficult feelings, when we
Mm-hmm.
don't should ourselves, I should feel better, I shouldn't feel sad. I
Mm-hmm.
feel how I feel. I'm having a
Mm-hmm.
bad day. I don't
Yeah.
feel okay. I feel sad. But
Yeah.
when you acknowledge that, you actually give yourself an opportunity to move forward. Then you can
Yeah.
say, well, what can I do to support myself? But
Yeah.
if you're stuck in the shouldn't feel this way, then you're trapped.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, I'm seeing this too. And I've seen it in my own experience. And I think it is, it's hard to talk about gifts of the pandemic, given how many people have lost their lives and jobs. But I think there are gifts of it. And, one of the gifts I've seen in my work is companies investing much more into mental and emotional health of their employees. And the other one is leaders becoming more open
Yeah.
about sharing their own struggles. Because the
Yeah.
thing is, it, as leaders, and by the way, my definition of a leader has nothing to do with how many people you manage or how your org chart. You're a leader if you positively impact other people's capacity to thrive. That's my definition of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I think influencers are leaders. I think you are
Yeah.
a leader, founders are leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing more and more people normalize talking
Yeah.
about challenges. And I think that is a big gift because, by the way, just to geek out on research a little bit more, when you acknowledge your difficult feelings, and by that I mean you say, I'm feeling bad, or I have a bad day, or I feel sad. You name a feeling. You experience it for a shorter amount of time and with less intensity.
Yeah.
Because, as Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, used to say, that which you resist persists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just your brain needs to be acknowledged, but there's also that power of connection,
Yeah.
right? When we become a little bit more open about our challenges, we recognize we are not alone, right?
Yeah.
My story of burnout had different facts maybe from other people's, but we all have had struggles. We've all had those moments. And when we are more open, we're more connected.
Yeah.
Right. And that is ultimately, if there, let's like get us, that's a great conclusion to like where we began about happiness. But ultimately, we cannot be happy on our own.
Yeah.
We are not meant to go through life alone. A sense of human connection and a sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself is absolutely essential it is much easier to cultivate when we drop our crap and we just are real. And then we actually get the boost from that gives us strength.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And so, I mean, I could kind of keep going on and talking. This is you have so much to share, Nataly. I want to understand just before we sort of break, because I think there's a lot that people are going to take away from this episode. If you had to kind of sum up, what would be the thing you would say out of all that you've learned, out of all that you kind of, really had to take from your experiences, what is the most important thing that you would say people need to do to help better understand themselves so that they can go on a journey to be happier?
Yeah. And I think that would have to be the courage to get to know your thoughts and your feelings. I mean, I have this expression that I wrote in my book that I'm working on, that I realized that for most of my life, I really lived from like the neck up. Like I was very, my father's a scientist. I come from I was a math whiz. Like I was very cerebral. Like I analyzed everything. I thought, and the brain is a wonderful thing, and analytic capacity is a wonderful thing. But I think the recognition that your feelings are also important, that it's important to acknowledge all of them and embrace all of them. And just that, like creating a more supportive relationship with your thoughts and feelings. It begins by allowing yourself to have them, which means you start to observe your thoughts. You recognize you are not your thoughts. You are the one who hears your thoughts, right? The amazing Michael Singer, who's the author of The Surrender Experiment, which is a book I recommend, I think, more than mine. He had this great kind of on his journey. He said that his moment of spiritual awakening came when he realized he was not the voice in his head. He was the one who hears the voice. And so that's why, for me, I like things a little more practical. Like you are the editor of your thoughts. So start, like a good editor doesn't just take the manuscript and like go, like I'm about to turn my manuscript into my editor. There's going to be a lot of things. Okay. So be the editor of your thoughts. But a good editor pays attention to the writing. They ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this useful to me? Is it useful to the narrative of my life? Start paying attention to your feelings. When you have a feeling, don't dismiss it just because you don't want to feel it. So to me, it's that really recognizing that you have a relationship with yourself. You have a relationship with your thoughts and your feelings. We'll start getting to know that relationship.
Yeah. I love that. And, I think you have so much to offer people. Like I literally know that I could go on and talking to you for hours. We're going to put your links in the description of the show when the episode airs. But what if you had to tell people like one place, maybe two places where they should follow you so they can kind of keep getting your insights? So
two easy places. One is Instagram, just because that's where I post daily. Nataly Kogan, it's easy. You will see a lot of yellow. I do love yellow. So if you don't like yellow, don't follow me on Instagram. But the other one is go to happier.com and subscribe to the weekly email. I write every single one myself. It's stuff like this. And, you get to know, like I do this and you get all this in the email, but I do a free weekly live session. It's called the Awesome Human Hour. We'll have to have you on, Eliza. It's called Awesome Human Hour. It's on Wednesdays at noon Eastern. It's free. If you subscribe to the email, there's always a link to register. I began it when the pandemic broke out in March. I said to my colleague, because my talks, my keynotes are closed, like it's usually a conference or a company. I said, I want to help support our community because I was, and you'll laugh at this. Everyone's going to laugh at this. I was like, for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be hard. I literally did. I was like, for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be hard. I want to do something. And so we started doing these weekly lives. I just did my 45th. So we stuck with them, but it's a great resource. So every week I talk about some of these skills. I have some folks on, so all of that. But the easiest way is if you subscribe to the weekly email, you always learn about that stuff.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Nataly, so much for being here today. We are so appreciative that you spent the time. We know you have a manuscript, so we are grateful for the time that you've spent with us today. And I can't wait for people to hear this episode.
Well, I am so grateful for your thoughtful questions. I have to tell you, we were chatting before. I've done, I don't know, hundreds of interviews, maybe more. I'm always so grateful for thoughtful questions that I get to answer something new. So I'm really grateful for that.